So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. In collaboration with the Ayn Rand Center Romania and as a part of the third Free Market Roadshow and Human Rights Day Summit in Bucharest, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Deirdre McCloskey, who is Distinguished Professor of Economics, History, English, and Communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Professor McCloskey has written and edited well over 20 books, and I think actually that number probably needs to be upgraded. As I found out just the other day, Professor McCloskey has completed no fewer than 6 books in the last 2 years alone. So she writes more quickly than I can read. In addition to that, she's published some 400 articles on economic theory, economic history, philosophy, rhetoric, feminism, ethics, and law. An economist by training, it is clear from Professor McCloskey's wide-ranging publications that her interests and expertise extend much further indeed, which I think redounds to her authority as an economist, because as Friedrich von Hayek once stated, nobody can be a great economist who is only an economist. And in her erudition, in her emphasis on the importance of ideas, and in her keen attention to rhetoric, Professor McCloskey is a true descendant of the 18th century bourgeois thinkers whom she venerates, such as the blessed Adam Smith. The title of her talk today is How Liberty, Not Investment or Stealing or Legal Change, How Liberty Made Us Rich. And so with that, thank you for joining us, Professor McCloskey. The virtual floor is now yours.
Oh, defect. I stutter on the word stutter often, so I won't say that I stutter, but I do occasionally. I'm like Marilyn Monroe and Winston Churchill. I'm going to be brief, but professors are always saying that I will only take 3 hours to exposit my great thoughts. But I think I can condense them down to not very long, and then we can have questions and answers from the floor or from you. And all this is based on a trilogy that I did. Great thick books. I can show you some of them. They're just enormous. Here we go. They're great thick things like this. 3 of them because it's a trilogy. And they were published in 2006 and 2010, and then the last one 2016. Now, as you mentioned, Scott, I've continued to write other things, but they're derived from these 3 books, so to speak. I don't mean I'm just copying what I wrote in the 3 books, on the contrary, but they're I've been writing recently much more on politics. I've got a book called Liberalism. It was published in 2019, and then just this month, there came out from the University of Chicago Press a kind of a popular summary of the 3 books with Art Carden. And the title sort of is my theme. It starts with a joke. Let's see, how does it go? Oh, leave me, the title is Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. How the Bourgeois Deal Enriched the World. And it's a much shorter book than these great tomes. And is meant to be sort of lighthearted and even funny. We joke around a lot in a kind of a silly way. But But the theme is a very serious one. The question is how we got rich. Now, the Romanians and others will say, well, we're not rich. Yeah, but that's not even true. Romanian national income per head in real terms, allowing for inflation, has increased very greatly since, say, 1800. I haven't looked into the details, but I'm sure it's increased at least by a factor of 10, which is utterly unprecedented, and probably more like a factor of 20. In places like Finland and Japan, since 1800, the increases has been more like a factor of 30. Now, you can go back to your elementary school arithmetic, and you can see that we're talking about increases in income per head on the order of 3,000% or 1,000%. So the improvement since 1800 is nothing like as small as most people think it is. By actual survey, if you ask people, how much has Romanian national income in real terms, the ability to buy goods and services, increased per person since 1800? And they'll say things like, oh, it's gone up by 100%, maybe, or 200%. But no. The fact of the modern world, and this is not controversial, this doesn't depend on delicate decisions about how to measure national income, or is that the right measure? It's enormously big and unique. I often explain this by making a chart, and I can do it right now. A chart with the beginning of Homo sapiens back here about 200,000 or 300,000 BCE, and the present over here, and income per head among our hunter-gatherer ancestors worldwide, or even our agriculturalists in the last 8,000 years or so, was about now hear this, for everybody, about $2 or $3 a day, generously speaking. People died young. Average average life expectancy at birth was, couldn't read, obviously, most of them. Certainly my Irish ancestors couldn't. They couldn't travel. Of course, we can't travel now either. But they couldn't travel. They had bad health care, certainly to survive on, but that's in 250,000 years ago in Africa. By the way, we're all Africans. Everyone here is an African. It's just that most of us here, when our ancestors came out of Africa, they turned left. That's all that distinguishes us from the rest of Homo sapiens. But okay, here we go. $2, $3, $1.50, $2 a day, boom, 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 boom. And about here, there's instances to what we call civilization, by which that leads to important consequences to the invention. For Malthusian reasons, it doesn't get much, it doesn't make people any better off, and then it goes like this. And then we arrive at around 1800, way over here, and it goes, now watch, like that. So that's the explicandum, to use the Latin. That's the thing to be explained. It's the most important historical fact about the modern world, that we are much richer than our ancestors. And the question is why? Well, there are standard arguments. There's an argument from the right, and there's an argument from the left. And none of them are adequate, as I've shown in my books. The central argument from the right, which you find even in such sophisticated writers as Mises, is that capital accumulation caused the enrichment of the modern world. Capital accumulation, piling brick on brick, saving, abstaining from consumption, piling bachelor's degree on bachelor's degree. That's what caused our enrichment. In one of my books, I dissect a passage Mises, who I admire very much. Why is it a mistake to think that accumulation is the cause? Well, the problem is accumulation is an intermediate variable. It's investment, saving investment is only profitable if you've got a new idea. If you've got a routine idea, like going to university, which is a good thing to do, you're going to earn what the marginal person going to university earns. That's all. You're not going to earn big amounts just because you have a bachelor's degree. That's obvious. And to express it economically, obviously, sheer investment, just bricks, reaches diminishing returns very quickly. If you have a bicycle, say, how much better off would you be if you had 2 bicycles? Or 3 bicycles? Or 4 bicycles? I used to live in Amsterdam where we rode bicycles a lot. Of course, there is something to be said for having lots of bicycles because they get stolen. So, or they get stolen or thrown into the canal, but anyway, stolen. So maybe it's a good idea to have a little but you can see that there's a kind of bicycle. So there's a deep problem, and then of course there's the historical problem that saving and investment is a human routine. I mean, bees also save and invest, so do lots of other animals and plants, you might say. But humans, since the beginning, have saved a lot. I'm a student, in fact, I'm working now on a book on the student of these matters. And I can tell you that peasants in the Middle Ages, very poor people, in Romania, in Austria, in France, in Britain, wherever they were, China, India, not so much China, for reasons I'll tell you, saved an enormous amount in setting aside seed grain. The yield per seed was very low in the Middle Ages in Europe, in wheat, barley, oats, very low. So you put a little grain of wheat into the ground and you get, how much do you get? You get 4 grains if everything works out, and 1/5 of your crop every year, which is a very high savings rate. So saving and investment, capital accumulation, say the Grand Canal in China, or the constant plowing in Northern Europe of fields, these are all investments, but they didn't enrich people. So sheer accumulation doesn't work. So this right wing, from a political point of view, argument that saving is really the heart of everything, and boy, we've got to, that's how we do it. On the other hand, there's the exploitation argument, right? Which we hear from the left. That the reason Europe, say, is rich is because it exploited the third world or for slavery. And that's got two problems. For one thing, it depends on the right-wing argument about capital accumulation. In fact, the word capitalism is very misleading because it leads us into thinking that capital is the cause. And on both the left and the right, people think accumulating capital is what capitalism is about. It's not. I won't go into the details, but it's really becomes kind of obvious that Europe is not rich because of exploiting anyone. Not that they didn't exploit people. I'm not an apologist or an enthusiast for imperialism or for slavery. I'm against both of them. They were terrible, but they were terrible for the victims. They didn't enrich the owners or the imperialists. So for both the right and the left, these arguments don't work. So what does work? What's my explanation? Well, it's kind of obvious when you think about it for 10 minutes. It's ideas. New ideas. Take a look around you at your room. Look, behind me, I have reinforced concrete, which was an invention of a man who owned an estate in France in the middle of the 19th century, who was interested in his garden. He invented it. New ideas are what make investment valuable, or for that matter, make it exploitation valuable. Investment in cotton breeding made slavery more advantageous in the United States before the Civil War. So what happened to us, or what happened, is that we got smarter about all kinds of things, about medicine, about reinforced concrete, about automobiles, about airplanes, about the modern university, which was invented in 1810 by von Humboldt at the University of Berlin, but all kinds of organizational, biological, mechanical things. We started getting a whole bunch of new ideas, and I mean really a whole bunch. It's not just the steam engine, which is nice, but by even late in the 19th century, steam was not the dominant power, even in Britain, which is somewhat surprising but true. No, it was widespread ingenuity. Now, wait a second. Humans have always been ingenious. They invented the bow and arrow, and they invented the wheel, and blah, blah. So what's going on here? Well, why 1800? Why does it suddenly, well, and this correlates well with the countries and the parts of the world that initially did very well out of what I call the great enrichment of the 19th century. We talk about the Industrial Revolution, which is fine, but there had been earlier industrial revolutions which had stopped getting enriching. It had happened many times before, the Song Dynasty in China being an example, about 800 years before the Industrial Revolution. A century we call the Industrial Revolution. It kept going, kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we kept getting richer and richer and richer. And the reason is these ideas, and where I'm saying the ideas came from the accident of liberalism. I do not regard Europeans as genetically special. The only thing we have that's special is we don't have enough melanin in our skins to survive in a tropical environment very well. because we don't get, if we go south to the tropical environment, we end up not producing enough or overproducing vitamin D, which is, and being white has nothing to do with European superiority. In fact, the theory of an entire society of non-slaves is very recent. The first in the Oxford English Dictionary on Historical Principles, which is the great dictionary in English, since 5b of the word liberal, its first instance is in 1761 in the History of England by David Hume. And it's since 5b, which is the one that we mean when we talk about ourselves being liberal, libertarian. It means a political system of non-slaves, where everyone's a non-slave, women and immigrants and foreigners, and blah, 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 everyone's free. And that idea, embodied in the great phrase by the slave owner of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was very conflicted, Tom was. But that idea, which was recent, you see it in Voltaire, you see it in other thinkers in Europe, but it really catches hold in the northwest corner of Europe. Holland to begin with, then England and Scotland, and then their overseas, some of their overseas extensions. And then it spreads to France and eventually to the whole world. That made people bold. It made ordinary people willing to, hey, I'll stop. My clock is ringing another time. It made ordinary people willing, as the British say, it's an English phrase, not an American one, to have a go. The British are very sports oriented, so they're thinking of having a go as in cricket, having a turn. And everyone had a turn, and they took it. Whereas what liberalism basically does is undermines the hierarchy of traditional society. And the trouble in the modern world is that we keep reinventing hierarchies. In fascism or socialism, in social democracy, we're all to be made into slaves of the state. And this is not a good idea. It's not a good idea for our economic success, and it's certainly not a good idea for our spiritual success. One more point. I'm right now working on an essay for a Spanish publication called Liberalism is Adultism. What liberalism is not selfishness. I'm not so enthusiastic about Ayn Rand, and it's not about, it's not I have a right not to wear a mask in public because I have a right to infect you with COVID-19. It's not that. It's not this kind of childish extreme of I'm a free person. I can do anything I want. No, it's the right to be an adult, to be a grown-up, to take responsibility for yourself and others in a free society. And of course, if you're any kind of slave, if you're a child or a slave, you're being bossed by people. You're being told what to do. And of course, in some ways, it's more comfortable because we all grow up in families where, appropriately, it's a family is a little socialist community, from each according to her ability, to each according to his need. And it must be that way. But the family metaphor, the family I called a great society, a big country. And what's worked spectacularly for 2 centuries is letting people alone. As Art Carden and I say, leave me alone and I'll make you rich. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You had actually mentioned the lockdown thing briefly,
Yeah.
and I had a question here from someone who was curious about whether a lot of the measures that are being taken by governments could potentially jeopardize, this great enrichment moving forward. As a matter of fact, we had a speaker a few days ago, Mr. Jeffrey Tucker of the American Institute of Economic Research, whose position on the lockdown issue was that you actually have a moral obligation to get out there and to contribute to herd immunity. What is your sense when it comes in general to the lockdowns and the fact that the governments are taking, it looks like a pretty heavy-handed approach all over, especially in the Western world, to deal with this?
Jeffrey Tucker is a dear friend of mine, and I love him very much. But I'm more on the side of Steve Davies on this, who incidentally is also a historian and a liberal. And here's how I think it. And I think the herd immunity thing is, I don't think it works very well. And I think the lockdowns are, I agree with closing schools, for example. I think it's irrational. Although, wait a second, there are old people in schools. They're called teachers or administrators or janitors. So this idea that you can just let it rip as though it were the common cold, which, by the way, is also a new coronavirus, and just achieve herd immunity, which takes 70% of the people to have the immunity. And by the way, it's certainly not true of the common cold that it lasts very long. So you may have to go through this every year, forever. Now this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yes, I think smoke. Wait, so my phone just rang. God, this is irritating. So I think it's impractical. Look, here's the pure liberal view of this, I think. Early on, you should jump on it. That's what New Zealand did. That's what South Korea did, Australia, Taiwan, and it worked very well. It's like a forest fire. Oh, damn it! It's like a forest fire. If you let the forest fire get big, then you have to do these clumsy, or at least people think you have to do these clumsy lockdowns. So you can see I'm sort of uncertain about it. I don't think that Atlas, this advisor to Trump, is entirely correct. What I notice about the people who strongly advocate the herd immunity thing is they never talk about the nation's of the with Western. I have to answer this. Hello? Hello? God, this is irritating. Wait a second, excuse me. Hello? I can't speak to you. I'm I'm in Austria. Okay, call me in about an hour. Good deal. Sorry, it's a friend of mine. So I don't want to go on and on about it because I think, thank God, we're going to have we're going to have vaccines soon.
I am actually, somewhat related to that because you had also mentioned Trump, and I don't want to belabor the whole sort of American election thing, but the inevitable question, which I'm sure you've had from many people, concerns China. And indeed, there are some people out there who are wondering, should, for example, liberals, proper liberals, take a harder stance against China, preparing, let's say, fair trade over free trade and that sort of thing?
Well, I think fair trade over free trade is a stupid idea. So I'm not in favor of that. But on the other hand, I think you're the person asking the question is correct, that it's just terrible that the Chinese Communist Party does the things it does to the Uyghurs, to the people of Tibet, to the people of Hong Kong, or indeed its ordinary people, and it threatens Taiwan and blah blah blah. So I'm very willing to give up trade with China to punish them. So I don't have any problem with that, because I think that in order for liberalism to survive, we need to resist the tyrants. There are really only two problems in the world: tyranny and poverty. And the one leads to the other. If we have a George Orwell sort of vision of states with their foot on people's face forever, that's not a future that suits humans. It suits the great biologist E.O. Wilson said, who's a student of ants. That's his specialty, he studies ants. And someone asked him how he felt about communism or Marxism. He said, yeah, I think it's great. It's wonderful, it works very well, but wrong species. It's fine for ants, he was implying, not for humans. On the other hand, I don't regard China's trade as a great threat to us. And I certainly don't view China's success in suppressing the coronavirus as a model for how we should do it in the rest of the world.
Yes, that's been quite a piece of propaganda on their part indeed. You had mentioned actually, yes, the two great threats, interrelated threats, being tyranny and poverty. I wonder, could you speak to the point, is there perhaps a third threat, or rather, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Can liberty or liberalism in any way undermine itself? Like, are there any weaknesses that its defenders especially need to be on the lookout for?
That's its big weakness. The other ideologies, the statist ideologies, the power ideologies, as David Bose wisely points out, there are basically only two political ideologies: freedom or power. And yeah, the problem is that we in liberal societies let people advocate for communism or for fascism, because that's a deep part of our ideology, freedom of speech. And I certainly agree about freedom of speech. So this is a long-standing tension in liberal societies. all we can do is be aware of it and to be constantly not making laws against people standing on a soapbox and advocating the ideas of V.I. Lenin or something like that, but arguing against them. That's all we can do. There's no trick to insulate a free society from the bad ideas of freedom.
Do you hold anything of the sort of the argument that, you know, liberalism becomes decadent or anything like that? I mean, do people all of a sudden just get bored of freedom when they've enjoyed it for so long? I mean, because one of the things that would seem to me is that it's rather ironic to see how common, you know, things like socialism and nationalism, the two bad ideas you identify, have become, because it's almost as if they were the outgrowth of liberalism's successes. We forgot about how bad it was, you know, how low growth was, how much we were all starving in the many centuries past.
Yeah, that's why it's so important that people understand that history. And that's why Steve Davies and I write these historical books, to keep reminding people, you know, you've never had it so good. Stop whining. Stop thinking that we can change the system and make things better off. But there's this constant threat, as I mentioned, from the truth that we all grow up as children in families. And families are socialist enterprises, or indeed authoritarian fascist enterprises. In any case, the family model, whether the supposedly good side or the bad side, the loving one or the nasty one, are often models in people's minds for how to run the whole society. And we have to emphasize that being a liberal means being an adult, a grown-up. And all we can do is preach. As I said, there's no truth.
Do you think that it's possible that there are some people who perhaps do not want to be adults? I'm reminded here, for example, Joseph Schumpeter's criticism of Hayek's Road to Serfdom, and he said that actually one of the points is the society that Hayek would like to see is something that really applies to only a very small group of people. Most people just want to have, you know, the handouts and stuff like that.
I've done a long essay about Schumpeter, which is on my website. And Schumpeter never decided which side he was on. He wrote his great book in 1911 on entrepreneurship, and he wrote history books and history of economic thought and so forth. And he was always ironic. He admired Marxism, especially in its sort of sociological side, too much. But he also knew that free enterprise is a good idea. So he's constantly at war with himself. And that's an example. Yeah, I'm afraid, as Erich Fromm said, there is what do you call it, the fear of freedom, or that there are lots of people, he was a psychoanalyst, lots of people don't want to get out of childhood. They want to stay with mama and papa's state. And again, all we can do is preach to people. And of course, you and I can preach as intellectuals, and we can write, have conversations and write essays and so forth. But the real teaching comes in the arts. I'm thinking that jazz, think of the role that jazz had in Soviet society, jazz from the West. And you think about 1930s style, or for that matter, 1950s style American jazz, and it embodies liberty. The music is free, and therefore was aided by the Soviet authorities. The same holds for rock music. which embodies liberty. So it's those ways that we need to that will actually influence people and get them not to want to be selfish or, I can do anything I want, that sort of childish version of being a liberal, but an adult responsible version. American country music, for example, is intrinsically very liberal and very adult.
I love the references to the arts. I mean, actually, when you mentioned jazz and that, I was reminded. Actually, it applies even to classical music. I remember an international relations scholar, Richard Ned Lebeau, writes about Mozart and, for example, Le Nozze di Figaro. All of the intelligent people in that opera are all of the servants, the high-ranking people, the big oafs. So there's something very subversive and liberating going on there.
That's right. That's right. Although, by the way, the standard plot, really up until the late 19th century, in opera, in novels, in plays, and everything, was precisely the family tyranny. The tyranny of the family. The older father trying to impose his will on the young lovers. Think of Romeo and Juliet, or think of Roman comedy. This goes back, way back, same deal. But then, interestingly, it dissolves, and I wish someone would look into it, because I think the reason it dissolves is that individuals become rich, so to speak. I don't mean fabulously rich. I mean, they aren't starving to death anymore. And young people are able to exercise autonomy in a way they couldn't before. Take the case of young women working in factories. Before that, they worked on their father's peasant plot and were completely dominated by him. And then were handed over to their husbands and were completely dominated by their husbands on his plot of land. Whereas in the Great Enrichment and its earlier Industrial Revolution, young women went to work in factories and had their own money for the first time. So there develops out of enrichment an autonomy that changes the standard plots.
A question that is related to this as well that has just come up is about neoliberalism and how it is that here in Europe, oftentimes that's used as a term of opprobrium when discussing libertarians or classical liberals or whatever. And I was reminded of a passage from your Why Liberalism Works, where you talk about a particular Marxian at a UIC gathering who rebutted your remarks simply by saying, "Oh, I see that you're a neoliberal," and then sitting down. How does one counter that particular charge?
Well, for one thing, it's a vague swear word on the left. Neoliberal. I see you're a neoliberal, therefore I don't need to argue with you. And I have a friend actually, who was in that same group, who wrote a book on neoliberalism, but he's hopelessly a man of the left. And he couldn't, I kept saying to him, look, dear, you got to get more serious about this and think about what liberty actually means, and not keep saying, well, it's obvious that the state needs to intervene on a massive scale all over the place. That, by the way, is one of the dangers of these COVID policies, that it'll accustom people to the state intervening in everything they do. But I don't know. As I said, you can only preach. You can shame people, you can disgrace them, as I tried to do in that passage. I hope some of the people who were at the meeting read the passage and got kind of unhappy about how they behaved, because these were all friends of mine. I have lots of friends on the left, And these were sometimes dear colleagues of mine, and they sat there and they let him do it. You're a neoliberal. I don't need to. And by the way, the guy was giving a lecture about economic history. And, you know, I'm not the world's greatest expert on everything, but I do know a little bit about economic history. And he was not a complete fool. Some of the things he said were sensible, but I got up and said, no, wait, on this one point, I don't think you're right. And he said, as you said, I see you're a neoliberal.
One of the things that I think is so refreshing in reading a work like Why Liberalism Works is to see how you eschew any of the doom and gloom rhetoric and prefer optimism. And I have actually a question here from someone who has evidently also read some of your work. Exactly. Yes. Definitely. Yeah. Great. Fantastic. I don't have the other one, but I'll have to procure that.
It's available on Amazon.
Right. Yes, one of the questions here concerns, you've mentioned, for example, in I guess one of your, must be Why Liberalism Works, the fact that we've shot ourselves in the foot sometimes, 1914, 1917, 1933, etc. And this person would like to know, do you see any potential accidents on the horizon just waiting to happen? I mean, what are some of the big fault lines of things we got to watch out for?
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump, in a single name. If the United States goes fascist, which is literally what Trump wants. Now, to put it mildly, he's not historically sophisticated. He doesn't know what fascism is, but all of his instincts are fascist. And literally so. You can go down the list of what, there was an excellent article, I forget where it was, where someone went down the list of what fascism was historically in Italy and Germany and Romania and Hungary and lots of other places. And he went down it carefully and said, well, he went part of the way to fascism with this matter and part of the way in this matter. And he concluded that Donald Trump was not yet a fascist, literally. But he said, yeah, he's tending that way. And had he gotten a second term, the world of the world movement of liberalism, which has had ups and downs ever since 1800, it would have died, and it would have taken decades to recover it. I mean, I was very shocked, I think most people were, by how quickly Turkey went from being a functioning, it's somewhat strange, but functioning democracy, one of the only one in the Middle East, Israel and Turkey, period, that's it. Within 5 years, Erdogan had turned it into a fascist state, had fired or jailed tens of thousands of university professors. I was afraid to send emails to former students of mine in Turkey because I knew that the secret police were watching their email accounts. And if this person in the West of questionable politics was talking to them, then they would end up in jail. So it was just horrible. And it could happen here. And look, it's happening in Hungary and Poland. And if you don't watch out, it'll happen in Austria.
Well, I think that's a really useful reminder of just how fragile our liberal democracies are in general. Right. In many of your works, I see that you have cited one of my personal heroes, Raymond, and yes. I wrote a work on him actually. He's the subject of my PhD. Yes, and
have you got a copy of it? Is it a good book?
I hope it is. I hope it is, but I'd be happy to let you be the judge of it if you would like.
Send it to me because I need to know more about him. because he's that rarest of things, a modern, that is 20th century French liberal.
Absolutely.
There are extremely few of them. In Italy, to take a slightly parallel case, what's crazy about it is that every Italian knows the government is incompetent, and yet there are very few Italian liberals. I don't get it. So anyway, yeah, about how long?
Yes, and I mean, I think he, as many people in the 20th century, especially, well, let's say of immigrants moving over, let's say from Germany to the United States, had a sort of tragic view of history. They knew that, you know, things could turn out, could confound our best, you know, sorts of plans and whatnot. And I think maybe to some extent, people like even the founding fathers may have had that understanding as well. I think they had a rather realistic or pessimistic even view of human nature. And they spoke very, very seriously about something that I don't know if liberals talk enough about, which is namely the phenomenon of power. And I find it ironic or problematic in a sense because the left, for example, loves to talk about power, and they locate it exclusively in corporations, for example. And I wonder, you know, how liberals might be able to discuss more seriously the phenomenon of power.
You know, I for a long time I kind of accepted that point. My friends on the left, especially, would say, but you liberals, you don't talk about power. Then it occurred to me that that's actually wrong, because we do talk about the real threat. The power threat, which is from the government. And as Max Weber said in 1919, the state is the monopoly of violence. We don't want to have a bunch of mafiosi running around independent of the state exercising violence, okay? So we have to have one authority with the, as he called the legitimate authority to exercise violence. So we talk about it actually all the time. We talk about it as the bad alternative. Whereas, so we simply got to change our rhetoric somehow. Make it clear that we are talking about power. We're talking against power, as the left thinks it is too. The right likes it likes authority and hierarchy, European, the traditional sort. They want the church and the state to be governing these stupid people called citizens. So I don't think it's quite right to say we ignore power. And the next time a socialist friend of mine says that to me, I'm going to nail him.
As we're coming to the end here, I'm going to be greedy and reserve the last question for myself here. One of the things that I greatly appreciate is you mentioned on several occasions in Why Liberalism Works, for example, that we should endeavor to listen, to really listen to other people, you know, exactly. And that we should endeavor to persuade them, you know, obviously not use force. So that being the case, and combined with the fact that I sometimes get the sense that the youth of today, they maybe spend too much time reading PDFs or short things online. What are some, apart from your works, obviously, which any well-bred individual of taste should be reading, what are some of the, exactly. But you know, it strikes me reading your work. I mean, you've read literature, philosophy, history, of course, economics as well. I mean, and that's such a, you know, that's what a homo universalis does. So what are some just classic works, a couple of classic works that, you know, everyone's got to read that's going to help you today?
One is I read recently. I see it over there, but I'm not going to stop and go get it. Is, what is his name? Evgeny or Vasily, I think it's Vasily Grossman. His last novel, which was suppressed by the Soviet authorities, was called, one English translation calls it Forever Flowing. And no one can read that rather short novel without appreciating how terrible a fascist / communist regime is. And you can have all this wonderful nostalgia for revolution, as I did as a kid. I was a socialist when I was a teenager. And think, oh, that Lenin is your hero, and so on and so forth. But then you realize, I mean, from this book, if you had one book to put in the hands of a person of the left, or in some versions of the right, that would be the book. It's terrifically powerful. It has an amazing, long dissection of Lenin. Not kind of theoretically that Lenin was wrong about his economics, as he certainly was, but about his personal appeal and how phony it was. The guy was like Trump in being utterly without an interest in other human beings, individually, and being concerned, if he was at all, with the mass. Actually, Trump isn't concerned with the mass, he's concerned with the law. But still, so that's one. I find the road to serfdom boring. I'm sorry to say that, but I do. But if you can get the kids, I think you can get them to read Hayek's great essay of 1945 on the, what's it called, the function of knowledge in society, whatever it is. It's too hard. But some version of that to then to kind of persuade people that central planning isn't the way for an economy to operate, that local knowledge is too local, obviously. Let me think what else to read. Good question. Well, there are some novelists, as I've just shown. Actually, Grossman is interesting because he started as in the 40s as a successful Soviet convinced communist novelist and journalist. And then in the 50s, I'm not sure if he went to the Gulag or not, but anyway, he decided, wait a second, this is a terrible system. There are some movies that are good. There's one called Joy, about Joy Mangano, the inventor of the self-squeezing mop, very successful female businesswoman. And that's in favor of markets. And about the same time, another movie with a similar theme came out quite uncharacteristically from Hollywood called, what was it called? The Founder, I think. It was about Ray Kroc, who made McDonald's into the great company that it was. And whereas most of it comes out of Hollywood, at least, and European film too, is monotonously anti-innovism. I prefer the word innovism to the word capitalism. It's always, oh, the bosses are terrible. They have all this gold in the back room and they won't give it to us. It's completely crazy, but craziness, as was it Kant or Hegel? I can't ever get it straight. Said, out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was made. Is that Hegel or Kant?
That's Kant, and I think that's Kant.
Yeah.
But I think that's a wonderful way to end this session. So on behalf of the Austrian Economics Center and the Ayn Rand Center Romania, I would like to thank you very much